My dearest brothers and sisters. This is Hakann speaking. I greet you in peace and love. To encourage open-mindedness, I would like to start with an observation. Likely you believe that the person you were 10 years ago had some unresolved issues, had some completely wrong opinions and had a lower level of consciousness than you do now. And most likely you are correct about these things. You are likely correct that you have grown in the last 10 years. Just think of who you were and where you were 10 years ago. And it is great that so many of you have grown substantially. I applaud you for that. Well, similarly, it is highly likely that the person you will be in 10 years, will look at the current you as a person who had some unresolved issue, who had some completely wrong opinions or who had a lower level of consciousness. And again, likely this will be correct. This suggests that most likely the person you are today may have some unresolved issues, wrong opinions or doesn't have as high a level of consciousness as you will have later in life. I would invite you to be open-minded to that possibility. To be clear, that doesn't mean there is anything wrong with you. The person you are right now is already good enough, is already an amazing person, and is already worthy of love. As you are right now. And also, in the future, you will be even more evolved than you are today. Even if you perhaps have some unresolved issues, some growth left to do and some wrong opinions. Even then you are amazing, you are fully worthy of love and you are good enough. As you are right now. With that in mind, I discussed what a spiritual ego is in my previous message Hakann, spiritual ego. To recap, spiritual ego is when a person has an unrealistically high opinion of themselves due to their spirituality. In today's message, I would like to invite you to try and observe a few things within yourself. This can help you identify and help dissolve any spiritual ego you might have. Perhaps you don't have any spiritual ego, or perhaps you do, or perhaps an inner part of you does. If you do have some traces of spiritual ego, that is actually quite normal. Many people do, perhaps even most spiritual people do. Point 1. Observe within yourself if there is a part of you that feels that you have reached the spiritual top and there is no further growth or knowledge to be gained. You might instantly become aware of such a part. Or you can ask yourself, is there a part of me that feels that I have reached the spiritual top and there is no further growth or knowledge to be gained? Any answer that immediately arises in you could be a genuine answer. If neither of those options work, you can also think back if those sorts of thoughts crossed your mind recently. Or you can keep this in mind in the following days. It is of course also entirely possible that you genuinely don't have these thoughts or such a part. That is genuinely true for some people. And in this case, great. If you notice you do have a part inside yourself, or you have thoughts that you already have reached the spiritual top and there is no further growth to be gained. Well, first of all observe it without immediately trying to change it or disagree with it or lecture it or condemn it. Just observe it. And if you can, give yourself and it some love. Acknowledge how far you've come, because yes, you really are amazing already, as you are right now. After all, most people on earth haven't woken up, and you have to at least a significant extent. Looking at yourself honestly and giving yourself kudos and congratulations for what you have accomplished already, is a fine and indeed very beneficial practice. So long as you're doing this in a realistic way, it will not inflate your ego. In fact, giving yourself acknowledgement and congratulations and love for how far you have come already can help dissolve any spiritual ego you might have. And if you have a safe relationship with a loved one, you can also ask them for love and acknowledgement. You don't necessarily need to go out and tell strangers what you have done. But just acknowledging what you have accomplished to yourself is healthy. It is healthy to have a realistic self-esteem, viewed through a neutral and not through a hypercritical lens. Point 2. Observe within yourself if there is a part of you that judges other people. You can do this in the same way that you did the last question. If you don't judge others, great. If you find that you do, well, again, observe it without immediately judging it. And give yourself love and acknowledgement. It is entirely possible that at this stage you will not yet be able to fully get rid of judgments. This channeler isn't able to fully get rid of all his judgments. Sure, he could tell himself that he shouldn't judge, but that would just push his judgments into his unconscious where it would become part of his shadow. What you resist, persists. In general, telling yourself that you shouldn't have bad thoughts or emotions will just make them unconscious, and then you might superficially appear more righteous, but in fact that won't get you any closer to higher levels of spiritual attainment. Instead, It's healthy to be conscious of your own judgments, to observe them, and to be wise enough to try and not let it influence your behavior or your words, and to treat others as fairly and lovingly as possible in your words and actions. In the long term, you can get rid of your judgments by removing so many inner barriers and blockages that you are overflowing with love and bliss, and then judging others will not seem sensible anymore. How do you get there? Observe, breathe deeply and slowly every day, and do your spiritual practice. You can also do onion healing, as I described in my article Hakann, Onion Healing. Or you could learn and embody that Earth humans really are just immortal reincarnating souls having human experiences through their human lower selves, and therefore there's no need to be judgmental even against people doing harmful things. Sure, you may still want to stop those who would harm innocents, but that doesn't mean that you feel judgmental against evildoers, or feel that you are superior to them. Still, actually embodying these things, and not just rationally understanding them, will probably take some time still. So for now, just observe. You also don't need to tell the people who you're judging that you are in fact judging them. Yes, you shouldn't lie, but that doesn't mean that you need to tell everything to everyone. Just be fair in your words and actions, and if you have some unloving thoughts in your mind, then that is something to observe, and by observing it, perhaps repeatedly, you will eventually let it go automatically. Point 3. Observe within yourself if there is a group of people that you feel hostility towards. To be clear, it is entirely fine to think that certain political movements or organizations are wrong or are net harmful. That statement is literally true when applied to certain movements or organizations. However, it becomes excessive if you label every single person within that group as evil, which usually isn't the case, unless you're specifically talking about the dark controllers or certain other specific evil organizations. So, not every Democrat, or Republican, is evil and is a net negative influence. Not every man is bad. Not every woman is bad. Not every Jew is bad. Not every immigrant is bad. Etc. Now sure, certain individuals in these groups may very well be bad. Still, it may not be your path to go and fight evildoers. Even if it is, well, you can disagree with or oppose certain people without actively feeling hostility or emotional anger towards them. Because what value does hostility or emotional anger add? Sure, it may be good to stop certain evildoers, but you can also do that without hostility or emotional anger. Though again, if you do feel hostility or anger, just observe. Why is this related to spiritual ego? Well, if you judge an entire group of people as bad, then that is a way to elevate yourself above them, and to label yourself as superior to millions or even billions of people. It is also useful to note that the media will likely only point to particularly bad people, which can skew your perception. For example, if 20 immigrants are obeying the law and working hard and trying to immigrate, and one immigrant does something outrageous, then the news will only tell you about the one immigrant who did something outrageous. Now you might still feel that illegal immigration is bad, which is a reasonable position to have, but it's possible to have that position without labeling all immigrants as bad, or having a visceral dislike of them as some people do. I get that some people are scared, but ultimately, you are an immortal soul who can't be harmed. On a fundamental level, you are safe no matter what happens. Similarly, it's not a noteworthy news story that a decent, loving family man does his best to help and love and provide for his family. But it is a noteworthy story that an evil male CEO did something horrible, or that some crazy man murdered multiple people somewhere. So the latter stories are the only stories about men you'll see in the media, even though the kind family man is far more common than either an evil CEO man or a murderer. Similarly, most Jews are simply kind and decent people. Most Jews aren't CEOs or prime ministers of Israel. If you feel hostility towards some group, it can help to do a little bit of research about what life is like for an average person in that group. Perhaps go talk in a respectful way to some of them, in real life and online. And then ask yourself, if you were an average person in that group, how would you want the outside world to treat your group? Point 4. Next time you encounter new information, observe how you process that information. Most people simply react emotionally to new information. If the information is emotionally pleasing or beneficial or worldview confirming, then the new information is assumed to be true. If the information is emotionally unpleasing or non-beneficial or goes against the established worldview, then the new information is assumed to be false. This sounds cynical, but this is literally how it works for the vast majority of people. Including many people who think they are very fair or rational or scientific or unbiased. And also including many people who think they are very spiritual. Now yes, it is possible to be so in tune with your intuition or your guidance that it is your intuition or guidance that processes new information. And if you're there, that's great. That's amazing. However, most spiritual people still process information on an emotional level. Sure, they might dress that up as saying, oh, this information doesn't resonate, but that's often just a rationalization for discarding things that emotionally don't feel good, whether they're true or false. Genuine intuition is rare. Usually when people call something intuition, then they're really just referring to their emotions. Yes, it's possible to be so in tune that true things resonate and false things don't. Some people are at that stage. However, most spiritual people are not. In fact, most people who say they are very objective or fair or unbiased or intuitive in fact are quite biased and are often led by their emotions. Whereas if a person says that they are biased and they're merely pretending to be as objective as possible, likely that person is more fair than a person who labels themselves as unbiased. Note that it is completely fine to say that you simply don't know whether certain things are true or not. It's completely fine to not have an opinion, or to not have a strong opinion on a certain topic. And it is completely fine to say that you don't care enough about a certain topic to spend the time to study it, because after all the true gems and the true treasure lies within. Acquiring knowledge about the outside world is useful to an extent, but ultimately fulfillment and happiness is found by going within. Point 5. Observe whether you apply different rules to yourself than you apply to other people. A spiritually egoic person might believe that if they feel the urge to be harsh towards someone, then they should indeed be harsh towards that person, and the harsh words were channeled or divinely guided, or it was necessary tough love that was for the person's highest good. But if someone else is harsh towards the spiritually egoic person, now suddenly a different set of rules apply. Now suddenly those harsh words are unspiritual and low consciousness, and people should act loving and respectful towards others. Similarly, a spiritually egoic person might believe that if unpleasant things happen to other people, then that is always for their highest good, or it's deserved because it's karma, or it's beneficial for them because they need to learn some lesson. But then if an unpleasant thing happens to the spiritual person himself or herself, now suddenly a different set of rules apply. Now suddenly it's an injustice that shouldn't have happened, and it only came about because someone else did something wrong and evil. A spiritual person may claim they believe that everything that happens is always for the person's highest good. However, this spiritual person probably locks his or her front door at night, thereby proving that he or she does not actually believe that anything that happens to him or her is for his or her highest good. If you apply different rules to yourself than you apply to other people, then that is a form of spiritual ego. After all, you're giving yourself a special kind of elevated status above the masses. Even though you're likely not the most spiritually advanced person on the planet. Most likely you aren't yet radiating love to the extent that other people comment on it, for example. Even if you have some kind of psychic ability unlocked. Well, that by itself doesn't make you a spiritual master. Lots of people who still have quite a far way to go on the spiritual path have psychic abilities unlocked. Furthermore, you're certainly not the only person on the planet with unlocked psychic abilities. Remember the Dunning-Kruger effect. People who have just started to develop a small amount of skill in an area typically rate themselves as being very good at that thing. This is because they're not skilled enough yet to see all the things they haven't mastered yet. Conversely, an actually skilled person will likely be somewhat humble and will be very aware of all the things he doesn't know yet or doesn't do optimally yet. So if you think you are super advanced in the spiritual field and there is little left for you to learn, but you're not regularly getting compliments from others about how they love your presence and treasure your words, then most likely you are in fact relatively new on the spiritual path. And that is completely fine. Everyone was new, once. And even a person who is serious about spirituality, and also quite new, is in a sense ahead of the average person who isn't interested in spirituality. Still, it is good to realize that the spiritual road can be very long, and that even if you have taken some substantial steps already, that doesn't necessarily make you a master. Still, I applaud everyone who is on the spiritual path. And most likely that includes you if you're tuning into these messages. So, great job. I applaud you and I respect you. Even if you're not yet a spiritual master at this moment, even then you are still an amazing person, Because you have started climbing the mountain in a world where most people haven't. You are already good enough, and you are already fully worthy of love. Your star brother. Hakann.